Dude, Greymass crushing it again today. What an interesting talk. This is the EOS Podcast by EOS Writer. We're going to get into everything Greymass talked about, but this is sponsored by Spores, an audio haptic kinetic puzzle box built by Hybrid.Games. That's our sound engineer, Scott. Hybrid.Games is using sound, touch, and your phone's physical motions. You'll learn how to unlock and collect unique digital items on the EOS blockchain. Visit Hybrid.Games to learn more. This is an awesome talk we had today. I was talking to Jesta, the one and only, the legendary man, Aaron from Greymass, also Myles, Snider, who you know from Aurora EOS, who is a partner at Greymass now. They talked all about, first we talked about voice, when that's going to launch. Then we got into EOS governance and all the drama and interesting governance stuff that's going on. Then we got into Greymass stuff, the APIs, smart contracts, the Anchor wallet that they're rebranding. This was a great talk. So Aaron Cox from Greymass, Myles Snider from Greymass. This is a rad podcast.
You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain.
The EOS Podcast, the first podcast in EOS history.
You stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Welcome to the show, Myles. Welcome to the show, Aaron. How you guys doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you guys here. You guys, I'm sure will have some interesting stuff to talk about. So what do you think the most interesting thing going on in EOS right now is?
I can start. I think probably the upcoming upgrade to EOS EOS IO 1.8.0. There's a few big changes in there, but I think one of the really interesting ones is that it's going to enable dApps to allocate resources to users on their behalf on the back end. And I'm pretty excited for that from like a dApp usability perspective. But there's also a bunch of other changes happening in that upgrade, which is why it requires a hard fork. But I think that's going to be very good for the network.
How about you, Aaron?
It's hard to put just one thing out there because there's just always this constant group of organizations that are continually tackling so many different topics going on. Between the 1.8 stuff, the continuous exploration of new governance models, the new protocols to kind of build dApps upon, all of it. It's just, we could talk about each one of those for quite some time.
And we will, probably.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly. Well, what do you think? So with 1.8 coming out, you said the dApps allocating resources. What are your thoughts on voice launching kind of and the timing on that? Do you think they're going to be ready, or you think there's going to be regulations in the way, or what's your feeling on that?
That's a good question. I mean, we haven't seen a ton of voice updates directly from Block.One since the DC event, right? Like, I think most of the updates we've gotten have been sort of speculation from the community. We do know that in order for voice to launch the way that they want to launch, 1.8.0 has to be in place. So it's obviously not going to happen prior to the end of September when that hard fork is scheduled. But realistically, I'm not even sure if voice is going to launch this year. Maybe there will be some sort of early beta tests, some sort of like, web browser-based experience rather than like an app or anything like that. But I wouldn't expect the actual sort of like alpha release of the product to happen this year. I think it'll probably take a little bit longer than that. And as far as the regulation question, man, that's like what we're all hoping to get some answers to, right? I think that it's Block.One is in this really unique position of simultaneously being like one of the few organizations out there who I think has a chance to build a really good user-facing application on top of a blockchain because they're super well capitalized, because they're led by Dan Larimer, who I consider one of the best technologists in the space. But at the same time, by virtue of being as well capitalized as they are, but by virtue of being as big as they are, they really need to play it safe when it comes to regulation. They can't really take that move fast and break things approach. And so I think that is going to slow them down. And to what extent, I don't really know. I mean, is it going to be that they don't let US users sell their voice tokens? That's a possibility. We just have so much like legal gray area here in the US right now. But I think that Block.One's kind of going to be at the forefront a lot of those questions there. The fact that they're building voice is going to force them to be one of the first companies that really has to get those questions answered from like a high level regulatory perspective.
Yeah, they are sitting in an interesting spot where they're pushing the tech forward so fast that they're right on that bleeding edge with the government. I mean, everyone knows about Libra, and Libra's kind of talks with the government. Voice is behind, they're not like behind closed doors necessarily, but they are, they're in meetings with the government as well, trying to figure out how to launch this. I mean, they're in Washington, D.C. trying to build those relationships. So it's interesting for me to think about if they're going to kind of let the Facebook legislation lead the way, or they're going to put some regulations in and then voice can follow those, or if they're going to slow Facebook down because it's such a behemoth and let voice kind of blaze the path. So we can't really, we can only speculate at this time, but yeah, I think you're right. We shouldn't be too excited or put too many hopes on this end of September launch.
Yeah, and I'd say honestly, if you're a user outside of the US, you should probably be a little bit more excited about voice, because it's likely that you'll either get it first or have more functionality. I mean, when you kind of stop to think about it, the fact that what they're really creating is a system to reward content creators, which is a pretty cool thing. And the fact that they have to ask permission from like the highest levels of regulators just to do something like that is a little bit silly, and it kind of shows you how slow U.S. regulators have been in addressing these issues. That's nothing new, though. Whenever you're at kind of the bleeding edge of technology, the regulation is going to take a long time to catch up. But unfortunately, in the U.S., I think it's going to send a lot of innovation abroad, cause companies to just geofence the U.S. rather than deal with the headaches of answering gray area regulatory questions here.
Yeah, that's really a big issue for the U.S. specifically. That now it's a global economy, and it's really easy for entrepreneurs and people with money to move globally and go where the regulations are easy. So they will lose a lot of the tech innovation if they don't keep up with it. So
absolutely,
yeah. I think hopefully, my hope is that Libra and EOS and voice don't get kind of tangled in the same regulation, because with Libra you have a social network that's trying to create a currency for their users, whereas with voice and EOS we have kind of this blockchain operating system, whatever you want to call it, and we're trying to put a social network into it that might also have a currency. But hopefully whatever regulations come down that's like no Facebook or fine Facebook, whatever they end up doing with their partners, that the details don't get lost and then kind of stifle things that aren't really the same.
Yeah, I worry that I keep going back and forth with whether like this Facebook Libra thing is good for the industry or not. I think in some ways you need a company of that stature to actually kind of go up against old school regulators who don't understand this technology and are going to try and just regulate it into oblivion. At the same time, Facebook is, like, if you look at it from a political perspective, Facebook is not particularly popular with the right or the left in this country right now. It's not popular among political leaders, and it's not super popular among like the general population. It's got over the last few years, it's kind of taken a hit in terms of reputation. And so not only are they kind of at the forefront of this, but like Aaron said, they're like creating alternative. They're creating a private central bank essentially, which is a lot more of a sort of threat to the U.S. government's interests than a social network like Voice is. So I hope that those don't get entangled as well.
It's a great point. And also the idea that Voice is possibly going to be identifying people on chain. I mean, it's that's a slippery slope as well that people talk about, is this idea that maybe the government loves voice. Maybe they can't wait for everyone to be identified on chain and be able to track their one token, one vote type of, one token, one account type of thing. That it's so yeah. So yeah,
I think that there's, granted, I think the degree to which voice as a platform will be sort of censorship resistant is still unclear to me. But generally, when you think about blockchain-based social media, like Steam, for example, you think about it in terms of one of the value propositions being censorship resistance. So if you look at something like Dissentium, which is on EOS now, is a cool like Medium alternative that's completely censorship resistant, and you can't get stuck behind a paywall without permission like Medium does to writers. But when you talk about blockchain-based social media, I think you're kind of making this trade-off between censorship resistance and then also everything being sort of recorded forever on the blockchain.
Right.
Not quite the same as where you can, send a bad tweet and go back and delete it, and people aren't going to notice. And I think that is something that a lot of people haven't thought through that hard.
Yeah, there's these different applications, and one of them is just everything there forever, full transparency for everyone to see. And then there's other applications where it can be used for privacy. So, yeah, and voice kind of seems like it's going to be a really transparent application. So I don't think the masses care too much about that. I know a lot of the crypto heads that have been doing this, as a form of unplugging aren't too big on the idea of kind of how voice is going to operate. But
yeah, but I think one of the other things that's interesting about voice is that, like, if you compare it to traditional social media, if you log into like Twitter or Facebook, like the content that you're being shown is dictated by an algorithm that nothing about, and very well could be designed to piss you off or designed to get you to stay on the site for, as many hours as possible, or designed to sway you one way or another politically. I mean, we don't know exactly how these algorithms are being designed or what the like goal of each one is. And so I do think one of the interesting things about voice that Block.One has said is that the algorithms that determine how content is shown will be completely open source and according to these predetermined rules that everyone can know and verify. And I actually think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, when you look at the Cambridge Analytica thing, there's actually a Netflix show, I think maybe coming out in a couple days, but about Cambridge Analytica and the amount of influence. I guess they claim they had like 5,000 data points on every U.S. voter, and were able to use those data points to kind of cater messages to each individual person to push their buttons in a certain way. It's just, the thought of every message that we see online is curated in some way to make us feel or do a certain thing is kind of a wild thought, especially since we're looking at our screens so much. It's a lot of things that we don't notice going on subconsciously there.
Right. The other thing that kind of turns it on its head is like with Cambridge, like you were talking about, the reason they were able to do that was because they could access the information. Whereas if we just operate under the assumption that when you're participating in some of these things online, you're surrendering kind of that privacy. When you're working in a blockchain space, like whether it's Voice or Steam or any of these other projects, like that data is open. Anyone can get access to it. There's not one party that has specific power over that. So it almost devalues the data that Cambridge would have had, because everybody would have had it been on a blockchain. So it's, in a kind of a weird way, it's kind of a jab at those people that are using like exclusive information as power by giving the information to everyone.
Yeah.
So, and that has huge implications across the board, but it's an interesting twist on kind of taking some of that power back or democratizing the data a little bit.
It's also, I think, one of the areas where, and it gets back to what I was saying earlier, but like where people get confused with the so-called like Web3 vision. Because a lot of people talk about like self-sovereign data or data sovereignty and all of that. And like Aaron said, you don't sort of, if you're using blockchain-based social media, you don't own your data exclusively and have it kind of private to you in the same way that Facebook currently owns your data. You're just sharing your data openly so that it's basically owned by everyone, and can't be and not owned specifically by one party. And that, I think, is going to, as we see more social media, blockchain-based social media applications developed, that's going to be like a big game changer, because that it's like these blockchains provide these like public data sets that anyone can then go and take that data and crunch it and do a bunch of things with it. And so I think the like analysis that we'll see come out of that by various organizations will be fascinating.
Yeah, we've had this transparency of information has kind of been one way. Like big corporations or governments can see everything and kind of have transparency to most of our online interactions through Facebook and things like that. But the rest of the people haven't been able to see the other way. It's kind of cool, the thought of not only would, in this case, individuals' information be transparent, but corporations that are operating on the blockchain, their information is transparent. So it kind of opens it up, like Aaron was saying, it changes that dynamic. It's full information for everyone, and instead of just kind of half of the big players having full information.
Right.
Yeah, that's wild. So, Aaron, you mentioned governance as one of the big things that's going on in EOS right now. Of course, there's all kinds of interesting stuff going on with governance. What do you think? What's your main take on governance right now, or where things are going?
I think more and more people are kind of starting to see what's happening in terms of governance. It seems like the people that want to actively govern are kind of being edged out a little bit, and that's kind of what the consensus is of the community, I'll say, that at least that I'm connected with, is starting to realize. There's a lot of mobilization happening in terms of exploring different methods in which we can kind of try to bring a little bit more balance back. Just to kind of summarize what is sort of going on, at least from my perspective, is we have entities who are now entering the governance scene exclusively to take the rewards that are granted through inflation. There's a lot of varying views whether this is a good or a bad thing, and it's good or bad for the network, it's good or bad for what's being done with the inflation, all that stuff. But the one thing that I don't think anybody can argue is that it's not good if we have parties that are purely motivated by financial interests to take over the role of a governing spot in consensus of this blockchain we have running. So I think that there's a lot of discussion going on about how we can kind of detach the incentives and move to a situation where we actually have decisions that are being made that are kind of unbiased towards what's best for the network. It feels a lot like campaign finance reform, or like, within the US politics system, where there's a lot of people that want to remove money from politics because lobbyists are pushing laws in specific ways that benefit themselves. That could be what we see if all we have is people in governance that are motivated by money. So it's really interesting to see so many different voting models, different incentive structures, different enforceable clauses within the contracts that we all agree to. There's so many of these little pockets of activity happening within governance that are all kind of just learning and evolving and trying to figure out some way that we can use this distributed system we have to kind of manage itself. I don't know if we wanted to talk about anything specifically in those realms, or.
Well, what would be talk about how maybe we could detach governance from the monetary rewards, and what the incentives might be for people to actively govern without the monetary rewards, or how that looks.
I don't know if we can completely detach it, but one of the models that we had thrown out a couple months ago was trying to create an alternative path for the people that are, that are just in it for the return on their investment, essentially. And we called it the worker candidate system. And it was a system just like block producers that actually paid more than block producers, or at least equal to, but hopefully more. that would create an alternative pathway for the people who are interested in a return on their investment to go down this path and use kind of the same mechanics as block producers, while hopefully leaving the block producer side a little less competitive in that sense, where we can actually start applying rules to the block producers. Nothing drastic came of that, but I think that idea is starting to lead into some new ideas. So I don't think I can give you a definitive, like, this is how we can do it, because I don't think we've figured that out yet. We keep proposing new ideas, and then those ideas will poke holes in, and then somebody else will propose a new idea that kind of takes a little bit from the old idea, and we all poke holes in that as well. A lot of this kind of stuff's happening in the various Telegram channels. I'm sure if anybody that's been participating in those has seen, there's various models that are being posted up with, like, if today we adopted this model, it would look like this. And while those are not incredibly accurate because the behavior is going to change as soon as the system changes, it's always interesting to kind of see how it flips it on its head.
Yeah.
I think that what we've seen over the last few months, and anyone can see this just by looking at any given block explorer, but we've seen more and more BPs rise to the top of the rankings who are offering kickbacks to voters who are voting for them, often through, fully transparent, even like on-chain systems. And that gets to, that leads us to a bunch of questions. One is that it makes it clear that a lot of voters are seeking a return on their tokens, right? And so maybe that should be leading us to explore ways in which voters should be rewarded for participating in the network. That's something I've been thinking about for a long time, and I know a lot of other people in the community have been as well, because by voting, you're contributing to the security of the network, and there probably should be some reward for that. But what we're also seeing is that the way that it's structured right now, instead of having it be like a voter reward that's doled out by the protocol, you have individual block producers who are offering to pay voters for either proxying them or voting for them directly. And what that leads to is just a race to the bottom, where one block producer may say, we're going to kick back 80% of our rewards, then another one comes along and says we're going to kick back 85%, and eventually you get to a point where block producers just can't, their margins compress completely. They're kicking back all of their profits and just running the sort of bare minimum setup needed to maintain a block producer. So that could ultimately be detrimental to the network in the sense that, block producers aren't going to be able to invest very heavily in hardware or, software or other services that we see, since kind of mainnet launch. A lot of block producers were making their value proposition. I mean, certainly at Greymass, like the EOS voter wallet, the upcoming Anchor wallet, the APIs, some of the smart contracts, that's been a big part of the value proposition of the organization, is building these free tools for the community. And then the block rewards are the business model. But if we move to a business model where it's a race to the bottom among block producers, then you don't have that ability to reinvest. Now, another direction this could go is that you just have, applications or, products and services that are built on top of EOS will run block producers basically as a way to either, generate customers, or just because it's something that they need to do. So that could be dexes, like new dex, for example. And, maybe their sort of main source of income will be the application that they're running on chain, but they're also running a block producer not at a profit in order to kind of support that. And that's possible, and kind of the direction that the chain is moving right now, that seems to be happening more and more. But I think that, I personally think, and I know a lot of other people in the community believe, that it's actually better for the network to have block producers who are value add, whether it's in building products or services or actually actively participating in governance. Because my philosophy on what a block producer is someone who's participating in validating the network and also participating in governance, because EOS really is an elected representative system. And so, on one hand, we could sort of preserve the status quo and just see what happens as the network scales, or we can explore ways to maybe compensate voters in ways that we haven't seen today, structure governance such that value add block producers sort of are compensated adequately. There's a lot of different ways that it could go, but ultimately it's going to be up to the voters on the network to decide.
Yeah, and I think kind of riffing on that, I think that Start EOS may have kind of won the race to the bottom already. I think that they were, I saw in a tweet yesterday, they were offering 6% possibly APR, and which puts them, I think, maybe even in the red where they're paying people essentially to vote for them. So they're operating at a negative, possibly. I'm going off a tweet I read yesterday, but I think that they're basically operating redlining to give more rewards than new decks, which is, go ahead.
I was going to say, I've seen that happen on other DPoS networks as well.
How does it end?
Yeah, where they will intentionally do either limited time or they'll do it for as long as they can, run at a loss where they're using funding from elsewhere to somehow collect the votes. And I am assuming they're banking on the fact that the price is going to go up or something. I mean, I don't logically understand the model behind it, but
I think with parties like Nudex, they may end up, I don't know if they're doing it now, but they may end up running at a loss because their main business is the exchange that they're operating.
Right. And in that
I don't
case,
know what Stardios's main source of income is. But yeah.
And at that point, we have to start asking questions about conflicts of interest, about what's best for the network versus what's best for their business. I have written about this extensively under the Steam experiences that I've had in the past about the power that comes with some of these responsibilities, and then a conflict of interest, whether you're going to do what's best for the ecosystem or for your business. Like if your business is where the money is actually coming from, isn't that what you're probably going to focus on?
And I think that the thing that we're seeing is that people are following economic incentives, right? And like that is what is to be expected, in my opinion. There's a famous, I don't know if it's like Charlie Munger, it might be someone, but it's like, don't show me someone, or I don't believe what people say their motivations are. I believe what their incentives are. And I think that, we've seen clearly that voters are looking for a return, and they may not be thinking about the long-term damage to the network that could be done by a race to the bottom among VPs. They're just seeking returns and kind of following the economic incentives. So I think rather than trying to think about ways that we can get people to be more altruistic, for example, we should think about ways that, how might we change the parameters of the system to create a setup that allows people to follow economic incentives, but also supports a healthy and secure network in the way that we want it to. And that's a really tough challenge. And that's been something that I think crypto communities and specifically DPoS communities have been grappling with for many years now. And so I think it'll be a process of iteration where kind of, we test different models, or maybe different chains test different models and slowly see what works. But I also think it's important to remember that, EOS it doesn't exist in a vacuum. And if the EOS network doesn't offer developers and, service providers and applications and entrepreneurs the sort of guarantees and security that they need in order to build their applications, then they'll do it elsewhere, whether that's on other EOS.io chains or just on other smart contract platforms in general. So I think it's important to remember that we should be seeking to improve EOS, because if we can't, then it's going to be outcompeted.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm thinking about something Dan would say early in the EOS network was that block producers would need to have a different form of income. It's almost, I don't think he saw the extent to which kind of we would go down this road or how quickly, but I think he saw some of this coming.
One of the reasons that can be helpful is that if you look at, for example, just the sheer volatility in the price of EOS, right? You had over the course of the year since mainnet launch, you had one point where the kind of annual revenue rate, if you extrapolate it out for block producers in the top 21, would be millions of dollars, and then the price crashed and it's way low. An exchange, for example, that operates a block producer as a very small portion of its overall business is much better able to weather those storms than an independent block producer who only has that as their primary business. So that's like an advantage of that setup. But I think, as Aaron mentioned, you also have to think about the conflicts of interest and the fact that a business who is running a block producer where the block producer isn't their primary source of revenue is not going to have the same kind of skin in the game that an independent block producer would.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if the block producer actions could be somehow like split off and subsidized by a worker proposal. It's kind of what Aaron was talking about, was maybe splitting these incentives up. And block producers, the ideas that you're saying, the things that we need for block producers to do are make governance decisions and kind of build the infrastructure. We'll hold infrastructure for quality nodes, but then build new tools. A lot of those things, it seems, could be done through a worker proposal. So, you kind of let the people that are just competing for money and for rewards and that race to the bottom type of thing, kind of let them do that on their own section, but then split off this section with worker proposals where teams are building infrastructure, teams are participating in governance.
The hardest part about the split is just because the block producers are the ones who get to make the decision ultimately. The 15 out of 21 consensus is what is going to drive some sort of update. So we could split a lot of the work, a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the open source work, the stuff that isn't going to generate money but we need. Governance is just slightly harder to split off due to that fact that the people who produce the blocks are ultimately the ones who make the decisions, and they could make or force a change not to occur based on their kind of what kind of revenue and what kind of returns and how much they're paying voters and on and on and on. So it gets sticky, but I don't know, maybe there's a system where you could detach governance from the block producers if the block producers, let's say, didn't make those decisions. But that's a big change, because right now we do have 15 out of 21 consensus. That is what we are using.
And the only sort of solution to that 15 out of 21 consensus issue is that if voters want to change so badly and the 15 out of 21 aren't implementing it, they can vote in new block producers. But that really requires widespread active participation from voters. And based on the participation numbers we've seen thus far, that's a pretty high threshold to meet.
And also, I think that safety valve is people sell their tokens and move to a different chain. They don't try to, talk with their tokens and change the chain. If they got that far along where they said, "Oh, we all have to stand up and change this," those go, trade into Bitcoin or Tether or something and see what happens.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So, that is it. It's cool to see chains like Telos and Wax, and there's these different chains out there experimenting with governance models. So that's cool to see. What do you think about if they were to, you had a governance, like almost a governing that. So we talked about splitting the governance into block producers that were incentivized for governance, but then having the top 21 block producers basically agree to follow the suggestions of a governing body. That gets a little bit too
I think my thoughts on that.
Convoluted.
I haven't talked about that.
Yeah, it might, but it's possible, and it might be an idea worth exploring, just if not to poke holes into it and maybe learn something from it. It's all of these things that we've talked about so far, they all play off of each other so much between, what block producers are doing in terms of incentive models for their voters versus incentive models for everyone versus, who builds the infrastructure. But the one thing, this is the first blockchain that has had organizations, full-blown organizations, come on board to start to become block producers, to fulfill that role, to be part of governance, and to kind of do what they're good at and add value to the ecosystem. Like this was a first. EOS is the first that has done this. And I think a lot of the disappointment a lot of us feel is that we're kind of moving away from that again at this point. We had something so unique. And arguably, if you look at the first year of EOS with organizations like us and all the other great organizations out there, there's a lot that's happened. We have a ton of products, a ton of onboarding tools, a ton of utility. It's amazing. Like I haven't seen anything like this before, and I still don't see anything of this caliber in existence. So I think we captured something, and we don't necessarily want to see it just dwindle away because people want to be rewarded on investment.
I totally agree, and I think that like you look at other proof of stake networks that have launched, a lot of them just have sort of Cosmos or Tezos or whatever it is. They just have like just a basic staking model, and so the people either stake themselves or they outsource it to kind of a staking service provider that kind of functions like a mining pool, and just pays them out their reward based on their kind of pro rata contribution, and that's it. And the thing that I just like Aaron, the thing that I thought was so cool about EOS, and especially early on, is I would tell people what DPoS is doing is it's incentivizing well over 100 independent organizations all over the world to work for the betterment of this ecosystem. And as a result of that, we saw, I think in the first year of EOS, we saw so much development and tooling built and infrastructure built and open source software built and free tools for users built, all as a result of this block producer structure. And I think we are seeing that change a little bit, and it's not, I think if we allow it to kind of continue on the trend that it's continued thus far, it's going to slow down the development of the ecosystem substantially, because those funds, rather than being routed towards sort of productive products, services, and improvements to the network, are simply being redirected back to voters. Now, that's not me saying that voters don't deserve to be compensated, because I think that voters are adding value to the network. But I think maybe we should explore ways to do that without just having block producers kick back their rewards to them directly. And I think it's important to remember for people to remember that EOS is the largest experiment in DPoS that has ever been conducted at the largest scale that we've ever seen it happen before. BitShares and Steam and other DPoS chains never reached nearly this scale. So it's a multi-billion-dollar DAO that is operating in new territory as it grows. So I think we should expect some growing pains. We should expect these challenges. We should expect things to be different from the way they were when DPoS was a smaller network with individuals running validators rather than big organizations. But I think it's important for people who are invested in EOS for the long term, not just token holders, but people who are thinking about building applications or businesses on top of EOS, to think about the long-term implications of this setup and what can be done to improve it.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the Start EOS. The play that they did is pretty interesting, actually, because where their votes are going for that proxy, they're voting back in some of the like EOS New York, EOS 42, some of the big kind of beloved block producers. Start EOS is supporting, so it's almost like they see this shift in the same shift you're talking about, where there was all these teams that are working and building these things that need to be built that are good for the good of the ecosystem. We're shifting away from that. It's almost like they're trying to kind of save their investment. Like, hold on, like let's keep EOS 42 and EOS New York and these guys around, because they're the ones that are building kind of some of the ground. Greymass, for example, that these teams that are building the infrastructure that everything's going to be built on. So it's kind of a Band-Aid temporarily, but I mean, even the big let's say parts of the big cartels here are seeing the same thing you're seeing and kind of trying to put a Band-Aid on it.
And it's very real. I mean, one thing that Aaron can talk about is like the network APIs and how important those are to apps and services built on top of EOS. And mean, Aaron, you can talk about what Greymass is doing in that realm and what it might look like if we weren't providing those services.
Yeah, it would be a little bit less reliable. I think that's probably the shortest way to put it. We're still serving out a large volume of EOS's API requests, mainly because we run some of the best. That's at least what we're told as to why people choose us. It's because our APIs are the fastest. And, obviously these dApps want the best experience for their users. And so it just kind of makes sense. But there's so much work to be done in that realm still. And it isn't going to be free, and it hopefully isn't going to have to be, the cost isn't going to have to be siphoned off on the end user. Nobody wants to have to pay to use an app if it's supposed to be decentralized. It'd be, I don't know, I could go on a huge tirade there, but it's that kind of work. And like you said, there are a lot of block producers doing a lot of this work, and hopefully some of that work ends up being recognized by some of the people who are voting for more of bottom line reasons. They need to realize that part of their bottom line is how well the network operates. You can't just nickel and dime build an ecosystem, because otherwise somebody else is going to come along and do it better and make your network look bad.
Yeah, we can shift a little out of governance here, because I do want to talk about Greymass and everything you guys got, and Aurora EOS and everything that's going on. So, I think that maybe 6 months ago or so, Aaron, you came on and talked about full history nodes.
Mm-hmm.
And then that kind of broke news to the community of how important those are. That's one of my most popular episodes, was that talk.
That's awesome.
And it was rad. And then all of a sudden, it just became this wave that Greymass, you guys started this huge wave of full history nodes and the importance of it. And then the APIs you guys providing, some of the smart contracts you've written. What do you think is the kind of the most, or what else is there? The smart contracts, APIs, and full history nodes. What else are you guys up to?
We're still working on full history. I actually just spent a month-long kind of research project building out a new server and kind of tweaking and optimizing, which hopefully we'll be sharing the results of soon. We're getting our full history node ready for 1.8 with the kind of tentative September targeting. We should hopefully be done well in advance. We'll have brand new hardware that we just spent a bunch of money on. And it should provide a really nice transition for us to say, okay, we're going to stop 1.7 and start 1.8 APIs. Since we've last talked, we've seen a large uptick of people running the light history node that we developed. Mm-hmm. There are probably dozen producers that are running that on their API nodes now, which is fantastic. So that kind of provides a little bit of history and then a seamless experience for the user when they want more history. And that has reduced the demand on our servers, both because they're running it and both because we're running it. And we're starting to look at building out better APIs. We spent our first year working, I don't know, I'd say probably 80 or 90% of our effort went into our wallet, with, a good other chunk going into APIs and whatnot. But building this wallet, we've really learned where the APIs kind of suck and what additional things we really could use the APIs to do. And we want to start building upon that knowledge. So that's kind of one of our next frontiers that we're talking about after we get anchored to a stable place, is that we have some really good ideas on how we could make the network more efficient and make it even easier for others to run. We wouldn't call them history nodes, but they would kind of replace the history node. And there's been a bunch of other good progress in that realm as well by people like EOS Rio and even EOS Canada with their closed source solution and Defuse. So there's a lot happening in that space as well, and a lot of evolution happening, which is amazing to see.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say that when you talk about that and you guys had that conversation, I think that was also compounded by a lot of misinformation that was spread via Twitter and elsewhere, kind of coming from people outside of the EOS community. Like, I remember one thing in particular, someone sent out a tweet that was like, the security of the EOS network is at risk because, it's 4 terabytes to run a full node or something. I think Aaron and Scott did a really good job of explaining why that wasn't exactly the case. As Syed from Cafe Block called it, the history apocalypse kind of passed. And I think right now what we have is just a lot of teams building. That to me was one of the coolest things to see, like in the EOS community. It was like, okay, there's an issue here. It's a pretty serious technical issue, but it's not insurmountable. A number of different teams all over the world kind of came up with different independent solutions. And now, the problem is being very directly addressed and is no longer perceived as this sort of existential threat that it was. So I thought that was very cool to see.
It's a good example of how the block producers add value. I mean, they kind of stepped in. I know we stepped in on those conversations and had many debates just to kind of educate users, but it's not all about the software we put out and the services we provide. It's about, the sharing of that knowledge. We spend a lot of time talking both with EOS IO community members and with just blockchain enthusiasts who have no idea what EOS is.
Yeah, it's the amount of information and all the things that block producers are up to. I mean, you just rattled off like EOS Rio, EOS Canada, EOS Cafe, Greymass. There's so many teams out there. There's Crypto Lions, Amsterdam. I mean, the amount of teams out there that are just crushing through code and just making things happen is just is amazing. And they're not being. There's kind of, they're not in the top 21.
Right.
That is a wild thought. Like tools and services that you use every single day in the EOS ecosystem. I certainly use the EOS voter wallet every day. That's a Greymass project, free, open source. I use blocks every single day. That's an EOS Cafe block project that's free, built by them for the community. That's powered on the back end by Greymass APIs, EOS Rio APIs, EOS Canada's Diffuse APIs. So much of what supports this ecosystem and makes it run is built by the block producers for the community for free. It's a
big collaborative effort. Like we talk to each other and kind of work to make sure that those services, that all of our stuff's playing nicely together. I mean, we all do really compete for votes, and I'm sure each block producer would like to be higher than every other block producer. But when it comes down to, the projects that we're choosing, the tasks that we set out to build, we reach out to each other, we talk, and there's a lot of competitive collaboration going on.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
It's almost like that all these block producers should be like a block producer Voltron, maybe like, the top 10 epic, like ones that should be this block producer Voltron, and then start EOS, and the other like cartels should vote that block producer Voltron into spot number 1 so that they're just getting like rewards, so they can keep like at least, and then, then they could have their own block producers that they're trying to get up into paid spots, but just to keep like the lights on, because I don't know, I'm just,
I mean, we did that, that's how Myles joined Greymass essentially.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be opposed to exploring it with other groups as well. But when it boils down to it, like in our position in rank 41st or something, there's only so much rewards to share, and, people's time has value. So it's hard to keep merging them all together if nobody has the actual financing to be able to make that happen.
Yeah.
It's a tough life out there for an independent DP.
Still enjoying it though. Still doing the work.
Yeah, I mean, and you've been doing this work since Just on Steemit days.
Yep.
And you were part of BitShares as well.
Not really. I mean, I was kind of an outside observer.
I was pretty involved in
BitShares, although I never ran a witnesses were what they were called back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
I never ran one of those, but I was pretty involved in BitShares. So I think the whole Greymass team has a lot of experience in DPoS chains, even prior to EOS.
Yeah. So what's up with the wallet? It's called Anchor now instead of EOS Voter, which is a cool rebrand. How is it beta launching, or where's it at?
Well, yeah. So EOS Voter is still the primary wallet, and if people are using it for sort of their, to actually interact with things on EOS and vote and all that, they should still be using EOS Voter. We will get pretty soon to the Anchor 1.0 release, at which point it'll have kind of feature parity with EOS Voter, and then we would recommend that people switch over to Anchor as their primary wallet. But if you're an EOS Voter user and you want to test out the beta version of Anchor, you can do that. It's just go to blog.greymass.com and you'll see one of our recent blog posts is kind of introducing the beta version of Anchor. You can download it. You can play around with it. It'll exist as a parallel application to your EOS Voter installation, so it's not going to override it or anything like that. And you can get a sense of the new interface and a bunch of the new tools and features that Aaron and the team have been plugging away at for months now.
Right.
But I when I joined the team, I'd been an EOS Voter user since, I think literally since the day one launch of the network. It was the first wallet I ever used. And, then when I started playing around with Anchor, like the interface is much improved. There's way more features. It's more intuitive, but it still has that security of EOS Voter. And also what I really love about it is that, as sort of a higher level EOS user, I can directly tap into all of the main features of the EOS IO software. And that's kind of our plan is once we get the 1.0 release out there, we're going to keep adding features, as requested by the community to keep adding new cool things to the wallet that people can do.
Killer.
It's been a labor of love for years at this point. And it's starting to come together. And the whole reason we didn't just drop it and replace EOS Voter to begin with is because everything's still very much in flux. We're talking about how to make things easier and more understandable and easier to onboard new users and things like that. But it is definitely a step in the right direction. I've been working on wallets for 3 years now. Working on the Steam wallet was one of my first real adventures in that. But we wanna keep maintaining our core principles, where we are one of the most private wallets, where it doesn't require you to connect to any weird servers or report who you are, or it's very private from the technical sense. And without getting too deep into that, that's just kind of one of the pillars that we've been building on this whole time. And we're excited for Anchor. It's actually going to be a named product. It'll have a website. We'll have videos and stuff. We'll be able to actually, we'll move out of a beta phase where we have this crappy named wallet where you don't even know it's a wallet because it's called EOS Voter, into kind of this real flagship product, where it's going to be something that we'll just kind of maintain moving forward. And we really hope other organizations will help us with it. It's not Greymass Wallet. We don't want it to be Greymass Wallet. We would love it if other people jumped in and helped with the initiative. This is an open source project that is free for EOSIO users and nothing more. There's no money for us and no money for anybody else, but we're getting close. We're getting close.
Cool. What are the differences with the open source wallet software that Dan released?
The stuff that Block.One released is very much just kind of a prototype signer.
It's also very mobile focused.
Yeah. Currently we are very desktop focused. But the wallet itself is more of kind of a password manager than actually a wallet. It's kind of a key manager as opposed to a wallet. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's kind of a novel approach. But it'll be interesting to see if anybody really takes that and runs with it. Personally, I think the new protocol that we've been building out, which we're publishing under EOP 7 or the EOS enhancement proposals, we kind of feel that a lot of what we're working on is slightly better and less complex than what they're building. But I think that there's opportunities to kind of, again, collaborate and look at all these different models that are evolving, kind of poke holes in all of them, and then pick what's best and kind of Voltron it all together, as you said earlier.
Yeah, the prototype that Block.One released is kind of, as Aaron said, it's a key manager. It's the way to think of it is just a standalone app that contains your keys and sign things when you allow it to. And then any sort of application that's built on top of EOS can either exist in a mobile browser or it's an app or anything like that. And when you need to sign something, it'll just kick you back to the Block.One, prototype app to do the signing, and then send you back to whichever app you were using. And I think that is an interesting approach for mobile, and I think it's probably the right approach for the future, rather than having like a wallet with an in-app browser where you have to do everything from within this one wallet app. And I mean, that's the approach we've seen with things like Token Pocket, which, by the way, I think is an awesome product. EOS Links, awesome product, but I don't think that's the future. And I think we've seen that already with Apple kind of cracking down on in-app browsers for services like EOS Links, whereas the Block.One style I think makes more sense in the long run. But that's very much focused on mobile. With Anchor, what we want to build, or what we've built, is really a very secure, private desktop wallet that allows you to access the full suite of features of EOS iOS software, and that's what it is. And that, I think, is catered to a specific kind of user, whereas what Block.One is working on with their prototype is more sort of thinking about mass adoption, onboarding, users who aren't going to have to know anything about really blockchains or hopefully even keys in the long run. So we're talking about not only different use cases, but kind of different target users.
It was very much built with voice in mind, I feel.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So that sounds more like kind of akin to some of the functions of Scatter. Would it be like that, you'd say? Okay. And
Yeah.
I've heard it referred to as like LastPass for blockchain as well.
It is. I mean, if you use a password manager, that when you log in if you have, I use Dashlane, for example, and when I log into a website on my phone, it gives me the option to auto-populate the password using Touch ID from Dashlane. It's exactly the same thing, but for key management.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So another new thing that I saw a Greymass announcement was the Wax candidacy, and that's such a cool blockchain and what Wax is doing. You guys want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It's actually the first additional blockchain we have decided to become a producer on. We've kind of talked about us diversifying a little bit beyond just the EOS mainnet since the EOS mainnet launched, but it was always a question of effort and being able to devote enough of our time to actually put thought into what other chains are doing. Governance is a big deal, and it requires a lot of time. So we can't be producers everywhere. But Blocks has a pretty interesting take on.
Matt, you got muted there.
Yep, I sure did. They have an interesting twist on a few of the more traditional mechanics. And for me personally, it's interesting that they're coming from kind of this gaming aspect a little bit. I was in the gaming industry before I went full blockchain, so there's a place in my heart that's like, ooh, gaming. That tied into it probably a little bit. But we're excited to be able to bring our wallet over, which we've done to a number of other chains. We're excited to put our hat in the ring to be a producer, to run APIs, to kind of help with governance, kind of all the things that we've taken pride in doing for EOS so far. And as time permits, and hopefully as we grow, we'll hopefully be able to take on maybe a couple more initiatives like this. Because once we have a true inter-blockchain communication method, the sky is going to be the limit as to how many amazing blockchains we're going to see built upon this ecosystem of tools we're all building today.
What would you say the biggest kind of difference between Wax and the EOS blockchain are as far as governance goes? What's the big takeaway?
It's hard to put a pin on something specific. Myles, if you do have something specific, feel free to jump in. One of the things that they are doing is they're doing staking, which is kind of a fundamental shift. or staking rewards, not just like staking for resources. So that alone is going to, even though it's a small change, is going to encourage a different level of staking, which will then impact voting and how producers are run. They don't, in terms of the actual mechanics, it's not all that much different in terms of EOS or than EOS itself. But when chains are in this kind of early inception phase, it's a little bit easier to kind of change the model slightly. Wax is still at the point where it's being run by producers that I am assuming are being run by the organization behind Wax. So block producers aren't even voted in and participating yet. But hopefully once that starts to happen, the actual governance will start to evolve, and we'll see maybe it diverge slightly away from how EOS operates in that regard. All these experiments.
Yeah, I think their voting mechanics are slightly different from what we're seeing on the mainnet. They have also got, for example, a worker proposal system that it should be interesting to see how that plays out. Because I think we're at a point where, as we learned from launching our worker candidates proposal, there's a lot of ossification on the mainnet, and it's going to be hard to introduce a new system like that, I think, on the mainnet. So we'll probably see more experiments with worker proposal type systems on other chains, including Wax. The other thing I think about Wax is that, they had a token that was created quite a long time ago and has been traded for a significant amount of time. And I think that, hopefully has one of the bigger problems with launching new chains is creating an initial token distribution, getting markets around those tokens and all of that. And it's, I think, one of the reasons why some of these smaller EOS.io forks haven't been particularly successful. So I think what Wax has done is hopefully sort of incentivized a community, gotten some infrastructure built around that. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. So yeah, I mean, for us, it was a decision about where to launch our next effort on another EOS.io chain. It won't be the last EOS.io chain that we support, but it made sense to be the next one for us, and we felt like we could bring some value to the Wax ecosystem as well with some of the tools that we're building.
Fantastic. Well, Myles, I know you got a hard stop coming up in about 5 minutes or so. So we'll start to wind down here. You got about 5 minutes? Is that right?
Yeah, I can go for like 10 minutes more or whatever. I'm pretty flexible.
Cool. The last couple things that I had here, and then you guys can kind of add whatever you'd like to, is your stablecoin index, the project there, and the EOS update. Those are kind of the things that I had on here to hit on. So if you guys would like to talk about that or anything else as we start to wind down the last 5 or 10 minutes here.
Yeah, I can talk about both those. So the stablecoin index is that was a project that I started kind of independent of anything else that I was doing. It wasn't necessarily related to Aurora, or I actually started it while I was working at Multicoin Capital. And I a guy named Mike McDonald, who's a really great developer from the Ethereum ecosystem. He's kind of the DeFi data guy. He's built a bunch of really cool websites that kind of visualize different data from the decentralized finance ecosystem. So he was really I kind of just conceptualized the site. He actually built it and made it work. And that was, I felt like, a project that the ecosystem needed. We had a bunch of different stable coins. I think people needed a place where they could compare data on all these different stable coins, and then also have some resources for actually learning about stable coins and keeping track of different projects. But it did get to a point with that project where I didn't quite have the bandwidth to actively maintain it. So I'm close with a few people who work at Masari, which is a really great company out of New York City that was founded by Ryan Selkis. And their focus is on crypto data. So they run on-chain FX, which I think is the best sort of like site out there right now for price information. It's much better than CoinMarketCap. And they've got a bunch of other initiatives in the space. So I approached them about sort of having Stablecoin Index join their family of different data initiatives, and they were stoked on the idea. And so I kind of handed Stablecoin Index off to them. So it's now being run by the Masari team, and they're going to start adding some new features and improvements to the site pretty soon. So I'm super excited about that. Couldn't have found a better home for that, because I wanted to see that project live on. And then EOS Update was the EOS newsletter that I was writing, and actually the last issue of the newsletter, to anyone who was subscribing, I let them know that I'm actually going to we decided to launch a Greymass newsletter. And so instead of sending the EOS Update now, we're sending a Greymass newsletter where the first issue is actually going to go out this week. And that'll do what the EOS Update was doing. It'll kind of offer an update on the EOS.io ecosystem, as well as commentary from the Greymass team about sort of specific things that are happening. And then it'll also have updates from our end, from cool stuff that we're working on, cool stuff that we want to highlight, and things we think people should know about. And I think that ultimately it's actually going to be a lot better than what I was doing at EOS Update, because, I have a sort of one particular perspective on EOS, but the other people on the Greymass team can offer insight on, for example, technical issues that I'm not able to offer as much insight on. And we can kind of keep people more in the loop about some of these products and services that we're building and the important things there. So if you're subscribed to the EOS Update, you'll as I let people know, you'll be automatically moved over to the new newsletter that we're doing at Greymass, and you can expect that first update to go out this week.
I'm on that list, man. I can't wait. I love these. I like the New York EOS Echo as well. Like, I try to get those. Sometimes I fall like a few days behind. I'm just overwhelmed, and I just go check out stuff like EOS Update. So totally. Yeah, I look forward to the Greymass. What's it going to be called?
It's if you can find it at greymass.substack.com. It's just going to be called the Greymass newsletter. Okay. And yeah, we're going to try and do it probably bi-weekly. So it'll be, that'll give us a little more time to kind of digest the, day-to-day news, figure out what stuff really matters, figure out what stuff we need to highlight. And then for people on the other end, it'll give them the opportunity to, only have to check in, once every couple of weeks, and feel like they can really get a sense of what's going on and what's important that's happening. Because honestly, as we all know, if you're deep in Telegram and Twitter on a daily basis, it can be just information overload.
Yeah, slow down that 24-hour news cycle for me, please. Thank you.
It's insane. It's so hard to keep up on all those various Telegram channels and know what's going on. So being able to bottle that and ship it out to the people who just can't spend 30 hours a week on Telegram.
Yeah. God forbid you take a Sunday off and go hiking or something, and you come back and there's just
hundreds of messages waiting.
Yeah. For sure. Cool. Aaron, did you have anything to kind of add as we start to wrap up here?
Not specifically. I mean, like I said, we're excited about starting to work on some more APIs, getting this Anchor release out, and kind of doing some more research on projects that we know will benefit everyone, regardless of what they do or what they're building.
Killer. Well, I appreciate both of your time. Aaron, Myles, both of you are legends. Greymass, fantastic block producer who's just, pulling their weight and then wait for 20 other block producers. So it's an honor to talk with you guys. So I appreciate having you on the show today.
Thanks for having us, Brandon. This is fun as always. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. We very much appreciate it. And it's great to get out and have these conversations.
We'll keep doing it. Well, we'll have you guys on again in the past or in the future. My brain's starting to melt. This is the EOS podcast for today. Cheers, everyone.
The money is not the prime asset in life. Time is.